The snow had been falling since noon, and by 3:00 the afternoon it lay 4 inches deep on the park benches, on the iron armrests, on the shoulders of the stone lion near the east gate. The light was going. People moved quickly through Carver Park, collars turned up, hands jammed into pockets, eyes fixed on the pavement ahead. No one lingered. No one looked at anyone else. That was the compact of a city in winter. You kept your head down and you kept moving, and you pretended not to see. The park occupied 3 city blocks in the middle of a neighborhood that had been, 20 years ago, predominantly industrial and was now predominantly not. There were coffee shops where the loading docks had been. There were converted lofts where the machine shops had been. The park itself had been a lot of things: a rail yard, a parking facility, a community garden project that had run out of money, and well before it was finally paved and landscaped and fitted with its stone lion and its duck pond and its 300 feet of path that curved around both. The city had installed benches at intervals of 50 feet. Most of them were empty. Emily Hartwell was 20 years old, and she had been sitting on that bench for 11 minutes when the man noticed her. She noticed him noticing, the way women learn to notice such things. A shift in a stranger's attention that is not casual, not accidental. She pulled her coat tighter and looked toward the street, willing the black car to appear. It did not appear. The man changed direction. Marcus Mitchell had not intended to be in the park at all. His original plan had been the grocery store on 5th. Then home, dinner, bath, bed, the unvarying machinery of a Tuesday with a 6-year-old. But Nia had spotted the park from the car window and said, "Please, Daddy, please," with that particular inflection that bypassed every rational adult defense. And so here they were, a grown black man in a worn canvas jacket and a small black girl in a red wool hat walking the path that circled the frozen duck pond. He had bought the jacket at an army surplus store 3 winters ago. It was not pretty. It was waterproof and it had good pockets, and it had been around long enough to stop feeling like a jacket and start feeling like an extension of him, which was all he required from clothing. He did not think about how he looked most of the time. He thought about other things. Nia held his hand and named things: snow, tree, bird. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. She was precise about naming, serious about it, as if the world required her supervision to remain correctly labeled. Marcus watched her and felt the thing he always felt. A tenderness so specific it had no word in English. Only a pressure behind the sternum. A held breath. He was 34 years old. He had been out of the army for 2 years, 8 months, and some days he still counted them. He worked nights at a machine shop in the warehouse district, which suited him. The noise and the metal smell, the rhythm of the work, the absence of conversation. He was not good at conversation anymore. He was good at reading a room. He registered the situation near the east path at 317. A young woman, dark coat, alone on a bench. A man approaching from the left, heavy set, deliberate stride. The particular looseness in the shoulders that Marcus associated with either intoxication or the intention to intimidate. Both, possibly. The man's trajectory was not the trajectory of someone passing through. It was the trajectory of someone arriving. Marcus stopped walking. Nia bumped against his leg and looked up. He watched the man reach the bench, watched him stand too close, watched the young woman angle her body away, a small practiced retreat. Watched her say something, no, probably, and watched the man not move. The 3 other people visible on the path saw it too. Marcus knew they saw it because each of them separately found a reason to look elsewhere. A phone, a dog, the middle distance, the compact of a city in winter. There are 412 feet between the east gate of Carver Park and the bench nearest the duck pond. Marcus Mitchell did not measure them then, but he had measured them later, in the way he sometimes measured things quietly without announcing it, logging the number in the part of his mind that cataloged distances, 412 feet. He had covered them in the time it took for the situation to change from something a bystander could explain away to something a bystander could not. The man's name, Marcus would learn much later, was Brandon Kessler, 38 years old, unemployed, with 2 prior misdemeanors related to disorderly conduct. None of this was relevant to what happened in those 412 feet. What was relevant was the grip on the young woman's wrist, and the angle of her shoulders, and the way her head had turned toward the street. Not looking at anything in particular, but looking away, which is what people do when they are calculating their options and finding them insufficient. His name was Emily's problem, not his. And he had learned that in this city, in this decade, stepping into other people's problems was a transaction with unpredictable costs. He knew this rationally. The man grabbed her wrist. Naya tugged his hand. She had seen it, too, or seen enough of it. She was 6 years old, and she understood the shape of a person being frightened. She said very quietly, "Daddy, that lady." Marcus crouched to her level. He looked at her face, her mother's eyes, serious and deep brown. He had thought, when Nia was very small, that he would eventually stop seeing her mother Alana's eyes in her face and simply see Nia. He had been wrong about that. But the eyes had become Nia's too over time, which was different from them being her mother's. They were serious, and they were asking him something. "Stay right here," he said, "right on this path. Don't move. Okay, I mean it." "I know, Daddy." He stood. He walked toward the bench. He did not run. Running changes everything. It announces alarm. It escalates. It removes options. He walked at the pace of a man who had decided something and was no longer in a hurry about it. The man heard him coming at about 15 feet out and turned. He was broad through the chest, mid-30s, the flush in his face from cold or alcohol or both. He looked at Marcus the way men like him always looked at Marcus. A quick calculation, a dismissal. The canvas jacket, the grocery store hands, no threat. "Keep walking," the man said. Marcus stopped 3 feet. He looked at the man's grip on the young woman's wrist. Then he looked at the man's face. "Let go of her arm," Marcus said. His voice was level. It was not raised. It was the voice he used when a situation had already been decided, and he was simply informing the other party. "You deaf?" The man released the woman's arm only to square up, shoulders rising. "Walk away, pal. This is none of your business." "It became my business," Marcus said, "when you grabbed her." The man shoved him. Both hands, center of the chest, hard enough that a lighter man might have stumbled. Marcus did not stumble. He moved back one step, absorbed it, and then was still. The man misread the stillness as hesitation. He raised his fist. There is a kind of violence that is not rage. It does not accelerate the heart. It does not cloud the vision. It is not emotional in any sense that most people would recognize. It is closer to problem solving, a clear-eyed assessment of mass momentum, leverage, and the most efficient path to cessation. Marcus had spent 6 years learning that kind of violence, 4 in the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2 embedded with a unit he was not permitted to discuss at dinner parties. Not that he attended dinner parties, he had applied it in places whose names he did not speak. He had come home from those places and locked most of what he knew about it in a room inside himself and tried to learn again how to be a person who sat at kitchen tables and watched cartoons and bought milk. He was mostly successful. The things that had changed were subtle and mostly invisible to people who had not known him before. He slept lightly. He sat with his back to walls when he had the option. He tracked the exits in any room he entered without thinking about it the way some people track the nearest coffee shop. He had strong opinions about lines of sight and none at all about most of the things other men his age argued about: sports, politics, home renovation. He was quieter than he had been at 22, more patient, less interested in proving things. He had a daughter now, which changed the mathematics of risk in a fundamental way. He did not take chances with his physical safety unnecessarily. He had never been reckless, but now there was a different quality to the caution. It was not self-preservation, exactly. It was more like stewardship. Nia needed him present. That requirement had more authority over his behavior than anything the Army had ever asked of him, which made it notable that when he saw the man grab the young woman's wrist, he was already moving. He was mostly successful. The man's fist came forward. Marcus moved left, outside the arc, 1 step. His right hand found the man's extended wrist, not the fist, the wrist where the bones were thin and the leverage enormous, and turned it. A simple rotation, the kind that hurts immediately and comprehensively. He stepped into the man's space as he turned it, using his hip and his body weight to kill the man's balance. It took less than 2 seconds. The man went down into the snow sideways, shoulder first, and Marcus went down with him, one knee on the man's shoulder. The wrist still controlled, the man's face in the snow. The snow was very white. The man's breath came out in a hard grunt. Everyone on the path had stopped. "I'm going to let go of your arm," Marcus said, speaking to the back of the man's head. His voice had not changed. "When I do, you're going to stand up and walk toward the west gate. You're not going to look back. Are we clear?" The man said something that was mostly pain. "Are we clear?" Marcus said again. Not a question. "Yeah," the man said. "Yeah, clear, clear." Marcus released the wrist and stood. He took 2 steps back, giving the man room. Watching, the man pulled himself up out of the snow ungainly, red-faced, his dignity obliterated, and walked. He did not look back. His footprints in the snow tracked a straight and rapidly retreating line. Marcus turned down the path. Nia stood exactly where he had left her, her red hat very bright against the white and gray of the park. She raised one small hand and waved. He lifted his chin at her. Then he looked at the young woman on the bench. She was shaking. He could see it from where he stood, the fine tremor that shock produces, different from cold, more internal. She was gripping the edge of the bench with both hands, knuckles pale, and she was staring at him with an expression he recognized. Not gratitude yet. Not quite. First comes the recalibration. The world had been one thing 30 seconds ago, and now it was another, and the nervous system needed a moment to catch up. He walked to the bench and crouched in front of her, bringing himself below her eye level. He had learned this. Downward angles are less threatening. He'd learned it from a trauma counselor, at the VA of all places, during one of the sessions he'd attended, and then stopped attending, and then eventually attended again. Hey, he said, it's over. He's gone. She blinked. Her eyes were gray-green, and there was intelligence behind the shock, behind the tremor. She was assessing him. He respected that. You're safe, he said. Take a breath. She took one. It was ragged, but deliberate, and it was the deliberateness that told him she was going to be all right. He had seen people take both kinds of breaths, the ones that were pure reflex, the lungs simply insisting on continuing, and the ones that involved some part of a person choosing to take them. Hers was the second kind. She was pulling herself back from the edge of it by decision. He shrugged off his jacket. It was old and had seen better winters, but it was dry, and it was warm. He set it across her shoulders without asking, because asking takes time, and cold doesn't wait. You don't have to, she started. It's fine. Nia arrived. She had walked herself down the path, following instructions to the letter, as she always did, and now she stood at his elbow, regarding the young woman with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned to pretend not to stare. Are you hurt? Nia asked. The young woman looked at her. Something in the woman's face shifted, the tight set of the jaw releasing slightly, the shoulders dropping a fraction. Children do that. Marcus had noticed it before, the way Nia's presence changed the atmosphere of difficult moments. She was 6 years old, and she was disarming. No, the woman said. I'm not hurt. Thank you for asking. My name is Nia. I'm Emily. That man was bad, Nia said, with the clarity of the very young. Yes, Emily said. He was. Marcus stood. We'll wait with you until your ride comes. Emily looked up at him. She had stopped shaking. The color was coming back into her face. You don't have to do that either, she said. I know, he said. They sat on the bench, Nia between them, her small legs swinging because they didn't reach the ground, and waited. The snow had slowed to something lighter, more decorative, the kind that catches in hair and on eyelashes. The park was quieter now. Most of the early evening walkers gone. The yellow light from the path lamps was beginning to matter. The bench was cold through Marcus's jacket, now that Emily was wearing it. He noticed this and said nothing about it. He had been in worse cold. He did not try to make conversation. It had been his experience in the years since the army that silence was something most people treated as a problem requiring immediate solution. They would fill it with anything, weather observations, commentary, questions, without particular purpose. He had stopped doing that somewhere in his second year overseas, when he had learned that some situations asked for quiet, and that quiet was not the same as absence. Emily seemed to understand this. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the park and did not perform ease, which was a form of ease in itself. After a while, Nia got bored of the bird tracks and came back to the bench and leaned against Marcus's leg and ate the crackers she had produced from her coat pocket, with the foresight of a child who had learned a provision for contingencies. Emily held his jacket around her shoulders. She kept looking at his hands, his dark brown hands. He noticed her noticing, and he did what he usually did, said nothing. Special forces? She asked, finally. He considered. Rangers? Mostly? Mostly? That's right. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my father was military. Marines. He used to say that most people don't understand how small the gap is between training and instinct. He was right. He died when I was 12. Marcus said nothing. He had learned that too, that sometimes the correct response to a disclosure is simply to receive it, to let it sit in the air without immediately covering it with words. "I'm sorry," he said, after the right length of time. She nodded. She was watching Nia, who had found something of interest in the snow, a pattern of bird tracks, and was following them with great concentration along the path. "She's wonderful," Emily said. "She is." Her mother Emily stopped herself. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "Her mother's not in the picture," Marcus said. It was the formula he used. Clean, sufficient, closing the question without requiring further inventory. Emily looked at him. He met her eyes briefly, and then looked at Nia. "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Marcus Mitchell." She extended her hand in a way that was slightly formal, slightly amused at its own formality. "Emily Hartwell." He shook it. Her grip was firm. She was not, he thought, someone who usually needed to be rescued. "Does this happen to you a lot?" she asked. The amused quality had settled into her voice now, the shock fully metabolized. She was testing the return of her own composure. "Rescuing people in parks?" he said. "First time. And the other thing?" "No." He paused. "I try not to." She studied him. He let her. He was used to being looked at as something anomalous. The quiet man at the park with the small daughter and the combat instincts. The machine shop worker who moved like he had done other things. A black single dad in a city that often made quick assumptions, standing in a park at dusk with an old canvas jacket and a child at his side. The car arrived at 10:04. It was not the kind of car you called a car. It was a black Suburban with blacked-out rear windows, and it came from the east gate and pulled up to the path with a precision that suggested the driver knew exactly where she was. Two men got out. They were not ostentatious about what they were, but Marcus clocked them immediately. The posture, the way they scanned the park before they moved, the earpieces. "Security," the taller one said. "Miss Hartwell." Emily stood, and she had a look on her face that Marcus had seen before on people who know something is coming that they cannot fully control. Embarrassment, maybe. Anticipation of explanation. "Emily Hartwell," Marcus said. Not a question. "I didn't lie," she said. "It's my name, but it's not all of it. My mother," she said, "is Catherine Hartwell." He knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. Catherine Hartwell was the founder and CEO of Hartwell Capital Management, one of the largest private equity firms in the Northeast. She had been on the cover of magazines. She had testified before Senate committees. She was the kind of person whose name appeared in sentences that also contained the words billion and influence. He stood in the cold air of Carver Park and ran a quick internal accounting. The young woman in front of him had said her name was Emily Hartwell, and it was. She had not told him what her name meant in this city, and that was her right, as it would be anyone's right. She had been sitting alone in a park in a wool coat, waiting for a car, and a man had grabbed her wrist, and now she was looking at him with an expression that was half apology and half the wary anticipation of someone waiting for the calculation to change behind a person's eyes. He completed the accounting. She was still Emily, who had been afraid and was no longer afraid and had said thank you to Nia with the directness of someone who means it. Everything else was information. Marcus looked at Emily Hartwell, daughter of Catherine Hartwell, standing in Carver Park in a wool coat that cost more than his monthly rent, his old canvas jacket around her shoulders. "Okay," he said. She blinked. "That's it? What else would there be?" She seemed to have prepared for a different response. Surprise, recalibration, the shift in behavior that money and names usually produce. She didn't seem to know what to do with the absence of it. The security man was still waiting. Emily shrugged off Marcus's jacket and held it out to him. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it. Take care of yourself." She started toward the car, then stopped. She looked back at Nia, who was still studying her bird tracks with enormous seriousness. "Goodbye, Nia," Emily said. Nia looked up. "Goodbye, Emily. I hope the bad man doesn't come back. May too." She got in the car. The door closed. The Suburban pulled away and was gone. Marcus put his jacket back on. He walked to Nia and took her hand. "Can we get hot chocolate?" Nia asked. "Yes," he said. "We can get hot chocolate." They walked toward the west gate, her small hand in his, their footprints side by side in the snow. He did not think about her for the rest of that evening. He made dinner, pasta with butter, Nia's current preference, and oversaw the bath, and read 2 chapters of the book about the mouse who wanted to be a librarian, and then sat at the kitchen table after Nia was asleep, and drank one beer and did not think about Emily Hartwell. He did think about the man's wrist in his grip, the way the body had remembered what the mind had tried to put away. He thought about that for a while. He found he was less troubled by it than he might have expected. The man had been hurting someone. The calculation had been clear. What troubled him slightly, in the way of something worth noting and filing, was the speed of it, the automatic nature, the absence of any hesitation whatsoever. He had not chosen to intervene and then acted. He had simply acted, and the choice had arrived after the fact, catching up to what his body had already decided. He was not sure what to do with that. He set it aside. He had a number of things set aside. He went to bed at 10 and slept without incident, which was not always guaranteed. On Thursday, there was a phone call at the machine shop. His foreman came to find him at his station and said there was a call for him, which had never happened in 2.5 years. Marcus took the receiver with the wariness of a man conditioned to unexpected contacts. "Mr. Mitchell?" The voice was a woman's, precise and measured, with the particular quality of authority that comes not from volume but from certainty. "My name is Catherine Hartwell. I believe you met my daughter Emily on Tuesday." He had known, on some level, that something was coming. He just hadn't known its form. "I did," he said. "I'd like to meet you," she said, "to thank you personally. Emily told me what happened." "That's not necessary." "I disagree. Not argumentative. Simply a statement of position. I understand you may have reservations. I'm asking for 30 minutes of your time, at your convenience, at a location of your choosing." He was quiet for a moment. Through the shop window he could see the floor, the press operators moving between machines. "There's a diner on Clement Street," he said. "Saturday morning, 8. A pause. He suspected that Catherine Hartwell did not ordinarily schedule meetings at 8:00 the morning in diners on Clement Street. He selected the location with a kind of deliberate plainness, the same instinct that made him choose seats facing the door, choose routes he could walk rather than drive, choose environments where the variables were his to set. He did not examine this instinct too closely. It had served him well. "I'll be there," she said. She arrived at 7:58, which told him something. She was taller than he'd expected from photographs, and she wore a dark coat and no visible jewelry, which told him something else. She had made an effort not to be Catherine Hartwell in this room, or at least not obviously so. He stood when she came to the table because it was how he had been raised, and she looked at him with an assessment that was so direct it was almost military. They ordered coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug, the diner-kind thick white ceramic, and looked at him steadily. "Emily told me you didn't ask who she was," Catherine said. "That when you found out, you didn't change. There was nothing to change. Most people change." "I know." She studied him. He let it happen. "She said you had a daughter with you, Nia, 6. Just the two of you?" Catherine set down her mug. She had the manner of someone who had learned to conduct meetings efficiently because time, for her, was genuinely finite. But there was something else underneath it, something more personal, less executive. She was a mother who had received a phone call about her daughter, and the executive manner was the container she was using to hold everything that phone call had made her feel. "I want to offer you something," she said. "Not as payment. I understand you'd refuse payment." As she paused, searching for the word with a precision that suggested she had considered this carefully, as recognition of a debt that can't be repaid with money. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Hartwell. I know I don't. Emily is safe because of you. I've been in this city for 23 years, and I've spent a significant portion of them worrying about what could happen to her." Something moved across her face briefly. "She's my only child. Her father died when she was 12. She told me." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Did she?" "She mentioned it. She doesn't usually mention it to strangers." She looked at him with new attention. "What are you doing at a machine shop, mister?" "Mitchell?" "Working," he said. She almost smiled. It was a very small almost. "I have a security consulting division. We assess risk for corporate clients, high net worth individuals, private institutions. The work requires people who understand threat assessment at a sophisticated level, people who can read a room." She paused. "I could use someone who can read a park." He said nothing for a moment. Outside the diner window, Clement Street was quiet. A few early walkers, a delivery truck, pigeons on a wire. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I'm not looking for charity work." "It isn't." Her voice was even. "The position pays twice what I imagine you make now. It requires skills you demonstrably have. The job exists regardless of what happened Tuesday. She met his eyes. I'm offering it to you because you're qualified. The other thing, that's separate. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He looked at Clement Street. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. They sat for another 20 minutes, and she asked him about the army, and listened to what he said, and didn't press where he didn't offer. And by the time they left, he had the sense that Catherine Hartwell was one of the more perceptive people he had met in his civilian life. It didn't surprise him that Emily was her daughter. Emily came back to the park on the following Tuesday. He was there because Nia had asked again, the duck pond, the bird tracks, the geometry of the path, and he had said yes because Tuesdays were his days off and it cost nothing, and it made her happy. He saw Emily before she saw him. She was standing near the east gate, collar up, looking slightly uncertain, which was different from how she had looked before. She saw him, and the uncertainty arranged itself into something more composed. I hoped you might be here, she said. Tuesdays. You remembered. You mentioned the park on Tuesdays. In the diner when you were talking to my mother. A pause. She told me about the conversation. You weren't there. No, I wanted to be. She said it would be better if she went alone. Emily looked at him steadily. She was probably right, she usually is. Naya appeared from behind Marcus's legs, where she had been conducting some private investigation of the snow. She looked at Emily, and her face opened completely. Emily, she said, you came back. I did, Emily said. Hi, Nia. Are you going to walk with us? Emily looked at Marcus. He lifted a hand. Your call, and she crouched to Nia's level, the way he had crouched on the bench that first day, and said, if your dad says, it's okay. It's okay, he said. They walked the path together, the three of them, Nia between them, holding a hand each. It was her idea, implemented immediately and without consultation, and the afternoon light was flat and silver on the snow. Emily was quieter than he expected. She pointed out the bird tracks that Nia had found the week before, long since drifted over but still faintly legible, and Nia was delighted that a grown-up had noticed. There was a version of this walk, Marcus thought, that could be self-conscious. Two adults aware of being watched by each other, performing ease. This was not that. He did not know entirely why. Some combinations of people simply do not perform for each other. And this, whatever it was, whatever category it occupied, was one of them. He walked, she walked. Nia counted her steps between their hands. She's extraordinary, Emily said when Nia ran ahead to inspect something at the base of a tree. She doesn't seem like she has any, I don't know the word, any defenses. She doesn't need them yet. Emily was quiet for a moment. My mother had me in defenses by the time I was 8. Board meetings, presenting to adults, learning not to show things. Is that a complaint? No, she said. Surprising herself slightly, he thought. No, it's not. She was preparing me for the world she knew, the world she thought I'd inherit. She paused. I'm just not sure I want to inherit it. He said nothing. Do you ever? She stopped. Started again. Do you ever look at someone else's life and think that's what I want, but I don't have the right vocabulary for it yet? He thought about the machine shop, the nights. Naya asleep when he got home, waking in the morning to find him already there. A small miracle she had come to rely on. Sometimes, he said. Nia had found a stick. She was using it to write her name in the snow, N-I-A in large uneven letters, and she stood back to examine it with the satisfaction of an artist who knows the work is good. What do you want? Emily asked. Right now? He watched Nia. This is pretty good. Emily looked at Nia's name in the snow. She smiled. It was a real one, not the composed public smile he suspected she wore in boardrooms, but the unguarded kind. The kind that reaches the eyes without instruction, he noticed. He looked away. He took the job. It was not a decision made quickly or lightly or because of Emily, which he was careful to examine in himself. He took it because Catherine Hartwell had been right. He was qualified. The work was real, and the pay was the difference between Nia's dental checkup being a source of anxiety and simply being a Thursday appointment. He spent 3 evenings with the offer letter before he signed it, reading it the way he read all documents with consequence thoroughly, in silence, noting what was explicit and considering what was implicit. He called his older sister in Portland, who was a lawyer and who he trusted completely, and she read it too, and said it was clean and fair, and that she was proud of him for getting it. He did not tell her the specifics of how it had come about. He summarized the situation in a park someone he had helped a connection made. His sister knew him well enough not to ask for more. He told his foreman at the machine shop with 2 weeks' notice, shook hands, and didn't explain. He started at Hartwell Security Group on a Monday in January, and the first weeks were logistics and orientation and learning the shape of a new institution. He was competent at it. He'd always been competent at new institutions. He saw Emily occasionally. She worked 2 floors above the security division in the investment management arm, which meant their paths crossed at the elevator, in the lobby, in the coffee station on the 14th floor. They were professional about it. They were, perhaps, slightly more professional than the situation required. He recognized the effort and made the same one. The park remained a separate thing. He and Nia went on Tuesdays, as before. Emily came some Tuesdays and not others, and he did not ask her schedule in advance, and she did not announce it. And this was an arrangement that satisfied something in both of them without requiring a name. In February there was ice instead of snow, and Nia slipped near the pond and grabbed Emily's hand reflexively, and Emily caught her without hesitation and held her until she found her footing. And Nia said thank you the same way she said thank you to everyone, directly, completely, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She's very comfortable with you," Marcus said when Nia ran ahead again. "I'm comfortable with her," Emily said. "She makes it easy. She trusts people." She trusts you? So she trusts the people you trust." She glanced at him. She hasn't had much evidence that trust is a bad idea. He thought about that for a while, walking. In March, Emily's mother held a small dinner at her house for some of the senior staff, a thing Catherine apparently did occasionally, informal but carefully orchestrated, and Marcus was invited as a new department head. He wore his best shirt and looked around the house and tried not to calculate how many years of his salary the kitchen represented. He was mostly successful at this. He had arranged for Mrs. Patterson to stay late with Nia, who had accepted the news of his dinner obligation with the calm of a child who has learned that adults have functions she cannot yet access. He had promised her the full report in the morning, including what they ate, which was Nia's primary interest in all social occasions. Emily was there. She wore a blue dress, and she was in her element in a way he had not seen. She knew these people. She moved through the room easily. She was her mother's daughter in every professional sense. She caught his eye once from across the living room, and something crossed her face that was not the professional composure. She raised her glass slightly. He lifted his chin in the old way, the acknowledgement. She smiled. He drove home that night and sat in the car in front of his apartment for 4 minutes before going in, which was unusual for him. There was a day in late March when the temperature rose enough that the snow on the park paths was not snow anymore, but the idea of snow, gray and collapsing, retreating from the edges of the path, revealing mud and dead grass, and the first tentative suggestion of green underneath. It was still cold. It smelled like cold and mud and something waiting. Nia had a cold and was home with Mrs. Patterson from upstairs, which she had accepted with the negotiated resignation of a child who understands that some battles are already decided. Marcus went to the park anyway. He went because it was Tuesday and because he had learned not to ask himself too carefully why he kept going when the obvious answer was sitting there in the open. Emily was there. She had come directly from the office, he could tell from the coat, the leather bag, and she was sitting on the bench that had not been a bench he thought about much before December. "Where's Nia?" she asked when he sat down. "Sick. Minor. She'll be fine." "You're here anyway." "So are you." She looked at the path where the snow was going. A bird moved through the bare branches of the elm tree overhead, quick and purposeful. "I'm not good at this," she said. He waited. She stopped, tried again. "I know what I'm supposed to want. I know the version of my life that makes sense from the outside. The firm. Eventually, the decisions my mother makes. The rooms I've been trained to function in." She paused. "I'm good at all of it. I've always been good at it. But, he said. "But I don't think I've ever," she said carefully, "felt as safe as I did on that bench in December with a stranger who didn't know my mother's name and didn't change when he found out." He looked at the elm tree. The bird was gone. "That's about the park," he said. "About what happened." "Maybe." She turned to look at him. "Or maybe it's about the fact that you look at Nia the way my father used to look at me when I was small, and I didn't realize until I saw it that I'd been looking for that in every room I walked into for the last 8 years." He was quiet for a long moment, Longer than was comfortable, probably. He was honest with himself in those seconds. He was afraid of the distance between their lives, the practical geography of it, the history of bad fits and worse timing. He was also honest about the other thing. The thing that had been present and unnamed since a Tuesday in December when a small girl had raised her hand and waved from the end of a path. "I have a 6-year-old," he said. "I know. I've met her. My life doesn't look like yours." "I know that too." She said it without impatience, as if she had already completed this argument with herself and arrived on the far side of it. "I'm not asking for your life to look like mine. I'm asking—" She stopped, looked at her hands. "I'm not entirely sure what I'm asking. I just know that on Tuesdays this is where I want to be." He thought about the machine shop and the job offer, and the way she had caught Nia's hand without hesitation on the ice in February. He thought about Nia's letters in the snow, N-I-A, and the look on Emily's face reading them. He thought about the kind of man he was now, at 34, which was different from the kind of man he had been at 28 or at 22. He had shed some things along the way that had felt essential until they didn't. The urgency that used to characterize everything, the need to have a theory of his own life. What remained was simpler, and it turned out sufficient. Presence, patience, and a belief that it was possible to be good at small things and have that matter. He thought about his daughter asleep at home with a minor cold and Mrs. Patterson from upstairs, trusting as she trusted everything that the world was as solid as it appeared. "Next Tuesday," he said, "there's a farmer's market on Clement Street. Nia wants to go. They have a stall that sells nothing but hot chocolate." Emily looked at him. "If you wanted to come," he said. The park was very quiet. The retreating snow made a sound at the edges of the path, the tiny settling sound of ice becoming water, the world going from one state to another without announcement. "Okay," she said. It was a small word. It was the right one. He did not take her hand. Not then. That was later. And it was Nia's doing. Nia, who came to the farmer's market in her red hat and found one of their hands in each of hers and simply walked, pulling them forward into the noise and warmth and the smell of coffee and good bread through a crowd of strangers who did not know their names or their history or the particular shape of what they were becoming. The market was loud with the business of Saturday vendors calling out, children running between the stalls, someone playing a guitar near the entrance with moderate skill and great commitment. Nia greeted all of it with the open attention she brought to the world in general, which meant frequent stops and a pace of approximately 20 feet per minute. Marcus did not rush her. He had learned that Nia's pace was correct for Nia and that the adult impulse to move faster was simply impatience wearing the disguise of efficiency. Emily stopped at a stall that sold small paper bags of roasted nuts. She bought 3 bags without consulting anyone and handed them out. It was a small gesture, and it was the right one, the kind that does not ask permission or announce itself. Nia accepted the bag with both hands in a seriousness appropriate to the receiving of gifts. The stall with the hot chocolate had a long line. They stood in it together. It was enough for now. It was, in fact, more than enough. The first real warmth came in early April, the kind that arrived without warning and stayed long enough to mean something. The park had color again, the first yellow-green of grass returning. A single patch of crocuses near the east gate that Nia discovered and crouched over for a full 3 minutes, explaining them to Emily with the precision she brought to all naming. "They were under the snow the whole time," Nia said. "They didn't die. They just waited." "That's right," Emily said. She was crouching beside her, 2 of them at eye level with the flowers. How did they know when to come back? They just knew. Nia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all propositions that interested her. A pigeon walked past on the path unconcerned. The sun was at an angle that made the puddles on the path bright. "I think things know," she said. "They just take a while." Marcus stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, watching. He had been many things. A soldier, a ranger, a man in a room he could not explain to civilians. A father, suddenly and completely, the day Nia was placed in his arms in a hospital corridor and everything he had known about the hierarchy of important things rearranged itself in under a second. He was learning to be other things too. He was patient about it. He had learned patience in places where patience was the difference between living and not, and it turned out the same skill applied to smaller and better stakes. Some days he still drove past the machine shop on his way to work, not deliberately, not with sentiment. It just happened to be on one of his routes, and he would see the lights on inside and think briefly about the years he had spent there. The noise, The smell of metal and oil, the way the work was physical and consuming and did not require him to be anything other than precise. It had been good work. It had been what he needed then. He was not that person anymore. Or not only that person, and the city kept its records of who you had been, in its geography, in the routes you still took out of habit, in the particular slant of light at a certain hour on a certain street. Emily stood up. She brushed her hands on her coat and came to stand beside him, and they watched Nia, who had moved on from the crocuses to a butterfly, the season's first, that had settled on the stone lion by the gate. She said something to me last week, Emily said. She said, "I'm glad you kept coming back on Tuesdays." He looked at her. "Me too," he said. Emily leaned into his shoulder briefly, lightly, the contact of a person who was not yet certain of all her rights but is beginning to be. He did not move away. He was very still, the particular stillness that was not absence but its opposite. He thought, briefly and without particular analysis, about all the ways a life can arrive at a place you had not planned. The army, the injury that had ended it, and then the recovery, and then Nia, and then the long, effortful business of building a life from components that did not come with instructions. He had done it badly in some respects, and adequately in others, and occasionally well. He was at this point willing to call that a reasonable outcome. He did not require more than that. He had learned not to require more than that, which was its own kind of freedom. And yet here was more anyway. Nia looked back at them from the stone lion. She considered what she saw with the calm of someone who has been waiting for something to catch up to what she already knew. She turned back to the butterfly. The afternoon light came through the elm trees at an angle that had not been possible in December. The branches no longer bare, the world reoccupied. Everything was still for a moment in the particular way that good things sometimes are, complete, unhurried, without need of announcement. They walked home the long way. All three of them. Nia talked most of the way about the butterfly, about the crocuses, about a theory she had been developing regarding whether pigeons chose their locations deliberately or simply arrived there and decided to stay. Marcus and Emily listened with the patience of adults who have learned that 6-year-old theories about pigeons are worth attending to because they are occasionally more accurate than the adult alternatives. At one point, Emily offered a counter-theory, and Nia considered it gravely and said she would think about it, which was the most generous form of disagreement. The city held its evening light a little longer now than it had in December. There was still cold in the air, but it was the kind of cold that felt provisional, like something serving notice. By the time they reached Marcus's street, the streetlights were on, yellow-white in the early dusk, and Nia had run ahead to the building door and was pressing the buzzer for Mrs. Patterson's apartment, even though they had a key. He looked at Emily. She was watching Nia with the unguarded smile, the real one. There was nothing else to say about it. It was sufficient.
How many times does a single dad have to stay calm while other people posture with power and push with entitlement before somebody admits what real strength looks like? Some men crowd with force and grab with arrogance, but Marcus answered it with control and stayed anchored to the one thing that mattered most: getting his little girls home safe. What would you have done in that park? And have you ever seen one quiet moment change everything? Subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes the real receipt isn't a title or a last name, it's who stays present when fear shows up. Because that's how you protect a child and the life they are learning to trust.